Doctors who've actually answered the question, is anyone here a doctor, what happened? Guy on a train was drunk and appeared to be in some distress and vomiting. When I got to the car, it was obvious to me that he was not vomiting because he was drunk. He was vomiting coffee ground emesis, an upper GI bleed. He was disoriented, likely for the same reason. The man was definitely not drunk. I turned him over to an ambulance at the next stop, spoke briefly with paramedics, and then got back on the train and continued to my mother's town. This was days after I graduated. I had not yet done a residency. Hasn't happened since. Was on a flight to London and the call went out at 5:30 a.m. I went to the back of the plane as directed, and I eventually was told to go to the seat of a passenger. When I got to his seat, he was slow to respond to my questions, but he was alert and could tell me where he was and where we were going. Turns out he was a chronic opioid user for pain and uses benzodiazepines like Ativan for anxiety. Well, he is afraid to fly, and anticipated that the rush through the airport would cause more pain, so naturally he doubles up on his opioids, plus his Ativan, plus he decides to have a couple of drinks mid-flight. He was basically so drugged up that his seatmates thought he was having a stroke. The stewardesses asked me if I wanted the captain to land the plane, but because he wasn't in any danger and we were about an hour from London, we just carried on and monitored the man. Just a few days ago, though, I walked into a bank and noticed a man lying beside the ATM. There was someone at the other one who was acting like everything was normal. I told the bank attendant and we approached the guy. Turns out he was a chronic alcoholic who hadn't had a drink in a while and was in alcohol withdrawal and had a seizure shortly after arriving. I don't know how long he was lying there or why absolutely nobody made mention that there was a man on the ground with vomit beside him. People were walking past him like it was normal. Transatlantic flight from Paris to SFO. Women developed a headache while watching a movie with her husband. Starting having seizures, vomiting and urinary incontinence. Took her to the back of the plane and tried to work the problem while we diverted to Goose Bay, Labrador. Her and her devastated husband got off, and were medevaced to St. John's where she died. Our flight couldn't leave since we had used all the medical supplies which every flight needs, so we had to wait till supplies arrived from another United-serviced airport. And #X200B, perhaps an aneurysm, so not much we could have done. Not me, but I was volunteering at a race event. A man had just crossed the marathon finish line, and went into cardiac arrest. While we were panicking and trying to get emergency services over, literally 2 seconds later, a whole race team of doctors, nurses and such crossed the finish line and saw what was happening. They sprang into action, and the guy ended up getting all the attention he needed and was fine in the end. It could not have been more fortuitous timing. It was almost comical. I work in imaging, specifically MRI, the big magnet, in a large trauma hospital. While I am BLS and first aid certified, I generally don't jump up unless everybody has that deer in headlights glazed look. I picked up some oat and was driving home after the extra shift, around 2230, 10:30. I see a truck on its top, and a circle of people watching. Yup, deer in headlights. Might wanna make sure whoever in the truck is out. So, park my car, hop out in my scrubs. Some bystander, she's a doctor, garbage. No, not a doctor. Not even carrying gloves for what I'm about to walk over to see. Poor guy is sitting upright against his upside-down truck, a nice degloved scalp lack and blood everywhere. Your scalp bleeds forever. A bystander hands me her shirt, and I use that as a makeshift barrier to hold the guy's neck until EMT arrives. Somebody yells for me to stop the bleeding on his scalp. Somebody hands me their belt. Saw, you can't use a belt to stop head bleeding. It's not very nice at it, thanks for the gold. But it won't stop the bleeding either. Well, the doctor in question is my father, not myself, but we were on a plane coming home from vacationing in Florida when, during the latter third of the flight, a man came stumbling down the aisle and nearly fell down as he passed our row. A few of us started to get up, asking if he was all right, and he quickly got up and darted into the bathroom, but not before we saw that his skin was a horrible ash gray. Dad speculated that he was having some kind of diabetic emergency. Guy disappeared into the bathroom and was in there for a long time, and after a while the most horrific smell began to waft out. A flight attendant eventually went to check on him, opening the door just a crack, the smell filling the whole plane, and was soon joined by more attendants, and after some talking amongst themselves, one asked, "Is anyone on board a doctor?" My father stood up and dutifully went back there, and when he opened the door to go in, we could all see that there was garbage all over the door and walls walls of the bathroom. Turned out the guy had consumed a lot of wine and shrimp cocktails for what would have been breakfast, and obviously something went awry. Anyway, when we finally landed, they wanted to bring the guy out of the bathroom to a waiting EMT before letting the rest of the passengers off. The guy was mortified and refusing to leave the bathroom as long as we were there. The staff in turn said that protocol would not allow healthy passengers to unboard before one with a health emergency. So, that kicked off a half-hour or more sort of standoff where the flight staff tried to convince the man to let them take him off in a wheelchair, during which they turned off the AC and had us all close our windows and stay in our seats. On a sweltering summer afternoon, while the poo stank permeated every inch of the plane, people were starting to gag all the way up front. Basically, Dad finally convinced the flight staff that having all the passengers get sick would be infinitely worse and to let everyone leave, since the poor garbage-covered dude was not gonna budge until the coast was clear. There wasn't a whole lot he was able to do for the guy otherwise, but I guess at least he spared a bit of his dignity. My son was playing baseball and took a hard grounder to the face. He was bleeding pretty bad, so the coach, another fellow, and I ran onto the field. The fellow said that he was a dentist and asked me if I was a doctor. I said, yeah, I have a PhD in physics. He kind of looked at me funny, then we walked my son off the field. I didn't realize until later that he didn't know that I was the father, and he probably thought I was some smart ass running on the field to offer medical help. Not me but my mother. We were sitting in a high-speed train for 4 hours and reserved some seats for it. I saw a guy sitting opposite to us with a lot of folders, so I assumed he needed to do some paperwork for his job. After 2 hours they stopped the train suddenly and called for a doctor in our part of the train. The guy and my mother stand up in seconds and just look at each other with confusion. He, what kind of doctor are you? She, cardiologist. He, oh thank God, I am a gynecologist. Tell me if it is a birth. It was a metabolism issue, nothing serious in the indebted, SRY about the spelling. Cousin's wedding, family member flew in from South America. Had a heart attack and was no pulse. Dentist guest began CPR. Doc guest relieved and ambulance showed up. Pulse was weak, but he was alive. Doc rode to hospital. Wedding reception continued. Family member flew home and was still alive years later. Medical student here, whose dad's a doc and mom's a nurse. We've had multiple holidays where this happened. The thing that was the most impressive for me, however, was a holiday where I was 11 or so. We were swimming in an indoor pool. Dad was outside, Mom was with me and my little sister. All of a sudden people start screaming and a 3-year-old toddler is pulled out of the water, blue and not breathing. Mom immediately started the Heimlich, upside down, to get the water out of the lungs, while my sister and I got Dad. By the time we got back, the kid was conscious and crying. Dad took him to the medic's cabin and had to literally convince the guy there to give the kid oxygen. Happy ending though, the kid made it without any brain damage. A fake. We still get a Christmas card every year, but yeah, that was a lot to take in as a kid. In my eyes, my parents will always be heroes for that. Obligatory. Not a doctor but friends. Rich family of Canadian hippies took me to a jazz festival in New Orleans. During dinner a drunk guy at another table started choking and Heimlich by waiter, was ineffective. His dad, a stoned, drunk, sunburnt family practitioner, hopped up and delivered some kind of advanced sternum punch and saved the day. Anyway, dinner was free, and a ton of drinks. Obligatory. Not a doctor, but I was sat next to one on a plane from Shanghai to Detroit. About 2 hours into the flight, the announcement comes over the PA. The guy next to me sits bolt upright and looks around for a flight attendant. The look in his eyes said he had been waiting for this moment his entire professional life. Once the doctor business had been taken care of, the flight attendants stopped by periodically to give him updates, and lots of free miles. Apparently it was a man in his 20s with a history of seizures that had never been to see a doctor about them. The older flight attendants proceeded to give the young man a stern talking to for the remainder of the flight. I was on a flight recently and a woman started having a seizure in the route ahead of me. I'm not a medical doctor, but when they asked if there was a doctor on board, literally 7 or 8 people came forward at the same time, including the guy sitting next to me. Apparently there was a pediatrics conference that they were all going to. It was a really interesting situation to be in, especially since several of the doctors had different opinions on what to do and the flight attendants were trying to help but also crowd control all the opinions, mostly because there were some things legally that they couldn't do. The lady having the seizure was fine in the end and they had people ready when we landed to check her out further. My wife responded to this on a flight with a Middle Eastern carrier. A passenger had collapsed on the flight. The crew would not let her see the patient, demanding her doctor's card. First, this is not something the UK General Medical Council produces. Eventually, when no other option was available, my wife convinced them she is in fact a doctor and was allowed to check the passenger. He turned out to be diabetic and hypoglycemic, so quickly resolved and a complete anti-climax. No, there was no special treatment for being a doctor or assisting, and the crew didn't even say thank you.